you check the children? Show a little match sometimes.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Sometimes. That is what
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Bienvenidos, Fright fans, and welcome back to the horror show. I am Jaime and Fuego, and I am so very stoked to be back here with all of you after just finishing up with my Film and Media Studies bachelor's at Arizona State. I haven't got to see all of you as much as I would have liked these last couple of years, but I'm back, baby! Guess who's back again? No, I'm not shady, but I have a new review for you guys of a film that was out in theaters a couple weeks ago, which is when I got the opportunity to see it, and it's actually hitting Shudder this week on May 8th, if I'm not mistaken. It's either May 8th or May 9th, so you can jump onto AMC Plus or Shudder, and you can check out The Ugly Stepsister. So, this is another one of those takes where you have a classic fairy tale, and we're doing kind of a darker incarnation of it. Now, they've tried this a number of times, obviously, over the decades. One of my personal favorites was Snow White, A Tale of Terror, which was from the 90s. I believe it was an HBO original movie. Sam Neill, Sigourney Weaver, really top-notch. And there have been some major missteps with trying to do this as well, Pinocchio's Revenge, whatever. But when it's done well, as in this case, it is always impressive. And so, hence the title, The Ugly Stepsister, is a tale told from the perspective of the ugly stepsister who, in the classic Cinderella story, is being positioned to compete with Cinderella for the prince at the big ball that, Cinderella has all of the, the carriage that's made out of a pumpkin and, the fairy godmother coming and all that different stuff. So, one thing to keep in mind, because I know it is touch and go for some people when you have to implement subtitles, and yes, this is a Norwegian film, but it was a co-production between Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Poland, if I'm not mistaken. And with all four of those countries working together, I gotta say, as far as overall thoughts go, the production is pristine in this, from the costuming to just the sets. I mean, these lavish, just huge estates, castles, these ballrooms, everything. And also the fact that we do eventually veer into that it's not as full-blown body horror as I think some people have been proclaiming it. And really, if I wanted to, I could have probably tried to do this on Infuegotainment, which is my personal solo channel where I don't really do horror stuff unless it's already been covered with Cecil separately. But no, it's not full-on horror. It's more dark comedy and commentary about social norms and things of that nature. In a lot of ways, I felt like, and this is going to be blasphemy to many, this covered a lot of the same themes as The Substance, and yet kind of, at least for me, film is subjective, at least for me, I enjoyed this more because of the fact that that movie was so much more about the male gaze. Doesn't matter if it was directed by a woman, and I know, this isn't going to be a whole discussion about The Substance, but I liked this more as far as how being a story of the necessities of women to conform their image, to, get the guy, to be successful, to, up their social standing, all those different things, because that's what this movie essentially explores. And so, in amusing fashion, but just to wrap up the overall thoughts as we hear the puggle dog barking in the background, possibly, I love this movie. From the score, I'll get into all of these things separately, but the score is an interesting combination of different things, both modern and of the period, because this does look like turn of the century. It's not like a modern take on this story. It is very much a period piece in its assembly and its presentation. The acting is stellar. I liked how it was areas of gray, in where you kind of, I assumed that since it's told from the perspective of the ugly stepsister, it was going to be just 100% sympathizing with her. I wondered if we were even going to get much of Cinderella in this particular story. It's more so shades of gray. These characters are very lived in, and they feel natural. They have verisimilitude. They feel like real people, with good qualities and bad qualities, a whole warts and all sort of thing. There is some definite, I hate the term cringe, but there are some cringe-worthy scenes in this movie. A couple in particular where a character is trying to transform herself, so to speak. That's all that I will say, because this is a non-spoiler review. But yeah, I'm really glad that I saw this in the theater. I hope it gets a bigger audience when it hits Shudder. But yeah, it is a tried and true story, guys, so there isn't really very much that I can say with regards to that. but the story is told from the perspective of the ugly stepsister, in the fact that you have this family, these two sisters, and their mother's widowed, and the mother is going to marry this guy who has this beautifully huge estate, like just an enormous, just sprawling home, like practically a castle if you want to classify it as such. And so she is marrying this guy and his daughter Cinderella, although she's not referred to as that. It is a nickname that comes upon her through the course of things with the stepmother, because we know what ends up happening with the stepmother in the classic Cinderella story. Cinderella's father dies, poor Cinderella. Yeah, that's what goes down. And so Cinderella is grieving, obviously, with the death of her father, and while she was initially kind of friendly with the ugly stepsister, the older one that we're following throughout this movie, she immediately gets irritated, and understandably, when these new sisters and this new family are like making themselves at home when they just moved in. The father just died like right after the wedding. It all happens pretty bing bang boom at the beginning of the movie. But there is also a very funny fantasy sort of vibe that we see right off the bat. First scene, with the ugly stepsister reading the poetry of this prince in this particular region where they're in Europe, and she imagines herself like, the prince, like, an arrow through my heart and stuff, but we literally see an arrow, whop, like, right through her damn heart, and, she envisions that the prince comes up and he's just like, I loved you I loved you so much, and you're dead, and like, love and death, and it's just, you can tell the tone right off the bat is going to be satirical, it's going to be just wrought with a lot of social commentary, but also really funny in the presentation. And so, yeah, the stepmother of the ugly stepsister and her younger sister, who has a little bit more like conscience and conviction. But anyway, so the stepsister and, just this new family is starting to cause some just strife and sadness for Cinderella. And so turns out neither of these sides of the family had money. Not the father, who the stepmother married, or the stepmother, because, she had lost her husband. And so that's why Cinderella and the older stepsister, the one we follow in this movie, get sent off to this reform school. And the training process is utterly hilarious with how these poor girls are being trained in dance and trained in, just makeup and appearance and, all these different things, because I have to find barons and princes and whatever, men who are essentially going to save them from the drudgery. And so the stepmother is adamant about this. That's why Cinderella and the ugly stepsister get sent away. And the ugly stepsister has to start going through a transformative process. And this is about where I'm going to leave it as far as story explanation goes, because there's a lot of stuff that you see in the trailer that, her nose is covered up, because they do this nose job bit that's just hilarious in this movie. I don't know if he was French or not, this, like, plastic surgeon, but, like, we're talking, like, retro back, turn of the 19th century is the best I could gauge it, I suppose. Maybe even 100 years before that, but, yeah, he's a very amusing character. He's like, first we'll start with your nose, then we'll work to this and that, the eyes, tits, all this different stuff, which is really funny. So about that transformative aspect, but there's other things that go on, later in the movie, which really add some darker plot details to it. But, back into, as I segue from the story that I've been gushing about to the acting, I really enjoyed the performances from, even though Cinderella is a supporting character in this, I liked how they portrayed her as not being just pristine, golden, sweet. No, she has kind of an angrier edge to her because of the fact that, yeah, her father died, and then this family of women essentially took over the estate. They are ignoring her father's rotting corpse, not even burying him, which leads to some funny moments and stuff. So, but then we also see another flaw of hers, which is touched upon briefly, and I wish they would have really come back to it later, especially when she goes to pursue the prince later on and stuff. But I thought it was a really interesting wrinkle to just showing the character. It was very impressive in that regard. And the ugly stepsister girl, she really has to straddle a line in sympathy, but also like a bit of begrudgery too, because of the fact that, she's she's initially like hesitant to go through these transformative things, but then as things start to really happen and the obsession grows, then we do see the darker side to her. So it's very nuanced, and I really like that. We don't really get as much from the stepmother. The stepmother's not quite as evil as you've seen in other Cinderella takes and whatnot, and yet I also like the fact that we had this much more sympathetic take from the younger stepsister, who, when everything is changing in the home, she ends up taking on more hands-on roles and stuff like that. And the performance of the prince is delightfully douchey in the few scenes that we actually get him. So this is not Prince Charming, man. Pretty much all of the men in this movie, it is coming from a female director, keep in mind, but you know, that's not always the thing. But most of the men are pretty shitty in this movie. And so, but yeah, all performance is very, very good. I already touched upon just the beauty and the grandeur of the set designs, the cinematography. They're all so splendidly put together. That's why I'm so glad I got to see this on the big screen. It's gonna find more of an audience when it hits Shudder, but damn, dude, I'm glad that I got to see it at a big AMC screen, kick-ass sound system, which really enhanced the score, which is quite prominent, and it veers back and forth between what I can only describe as like a modern synthy sort of just catchy with a little bit of edge, but you know, kind of upbeat and the type of stuff that I love in modern genre. But then we also pivot back to like, I guess you could only describe it as like, I've listened to some like, you know, Swedish and folk music from that particular region of like Scandinavia and stuff, and that's what I can describe it as well. So it has that nice dichotomy of retro and modern, which is also another great thing about just the entirety of this movie, is the fact that it's an old story, but it feels modern in its take, and yet still feels faithful to the source material. It gets dark, it's funny, it is a big, big recommend from me, everybody. I hope that Cecil and some of the other members of the show get the chance to see it. So that is going to do it, everybody, for yours truly's thoughts on The Ugly Stepsister, hitting Shudder this week. I believe it's May 8th or the 9th, so it's this upcoming Thursday or Friday as of the Sunday I'm filming this. I've been Jaime Fuego. You can find moi on all social media sectors, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, you know, all that shizzle. But the big thing here is for you guys to like, share, subscribe, and comment if you have seen this. What were your thoughts on it? Was it horror enough to really be covering here? Or do you think that the spooky community has kind of maybe overstepped their boundaries a little bit, and this is more so on just like the dark comedy sort of side? Let me and Cecil and the rest of the gang, Robert, Davey, everybody know. And until next time, Fright fans, I've been Fuego, y'all have been Rad Status, and until we meet once again, stay scared.